Welcome, everyone, to the final session of day one of the Parents and Caregivers as Partners, Affirming Belonging, Connecting Hybrid Conference 2022. So I am going to go ahead and share my screen. My name is Amira Craig, and while I'm doing that, I've placed some links in the chat. Those are some evaluation surveys, completely voluntary. If you'd like to fill those out, you can start to do that now, and I'll explain a bit more about those in a minute. Awesome. So let me So today we are, right now we are in the Mental Health Literacy for Black Communities session. This session is led by the Black Health Alliance Pathways to Care project. My name is Amira Craig. We are in session C, the last session for today. Thank you for being here and spending time with me, spending time all together with us today. We will begin with the acknowledgements. I would like to acknowledge this meeting is situated upon traditional territories. These territories include the Wendat, the Anishinaabeg Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Mississaugas of the New Credit, and the Métis Nation. I would like to recognize the enduring presence of Aboriginal peoples on this land. I also am going to acknowledge my own personal history and ancestral history. I am in a process of decolonizing the way I do land acknowledgements. Personally, I come from a first-generation family of Caribbean and Black American lineage, and I'm committed to continuing to sit with what this migration to this land means to me, and I'm committed to engaging in a relationship of respect, community, reciprocity, and solidarity with land keepers and the land itself. We acknowledge that Indigenous Africans who were forcefully removed from their native lands and dispersed across the New World. This involuntary migration heavily contributed to the movement of African-descended people across the African diaspora to places like Canada. As students and learners, we deem it highly necessary to think deeper and examine the processes that led to the dispossession of Indigenous peoples on the land and settler colonialism, stolen people on stolen land. In entering a conversation about anti-Black racism, it is important to center the humanity of Black children and Black families and to examine systems such as the education system that act upon them. We gratefully receive this ancestral acknowledgement from Natasha Henry, the president of the Ontario Black History Society, educational consultant and historian. So hi everyone, my name is Amira Craig, my pronouns are she and her, and I'm one of the health promoters at Black Health Alliance, and I work on the Pathways to Care project. I'm currently based in Toronto. So in terms of accessibility and inclusivity, as you all know, this session is being recorded and will be shared to a wider audience, I think, on the TDSB YouTube later at a later time. If you would like, you can keep your camera off, put it on and off as you feel free to, and you can change your name if you'd like to keep some anonymity. Captioning is available, live transcription, ASL, language translation is all available. As you know, if you've been attending sessions earlier today, we do have resources available for additional support, especially when we're speaking on topics like these. I myself will be available for 10 minutes after the session. And we do provide opportunities for anonymous feedback if you think that we can do the things that we do better, or if there's anything you would want to let our higher ups know. And in terms of inclusivity, I want to state that everyone has the right to feel as safe as possible at any event they choose to attend, regardless of age, ancestry, color, gender identity, gender expression, level of mental or physical ability, place of origin, race, religious beliefs, sexual orientation, or any other identities. Event spaces and all spaces should be non-threatening and supportive to all attendees. We at Black Health Alliance, Pathways to Care project are actively and consistently working to ensure that this is a reality throughout all of our events. So what we do at Black Health Alliance and with the project is it's a 5 years project focused on changing the system that we work in. And we have collaborated with a few different organizations, including CAMH, Strides Toronto, the Wellesley Institute, and Taibu Community Health Center. So our main focus is to remove barriers and improve access to mental health and addiction services for Black children, youth, and their families in Ontario. So what we did is we did a whole bunch of research, we surveyed a whole bunch of organizations, and we ran a whole lot of focus groups, and I will be sharing some of those results with you folks today. So, right before we get into it, I will put in the chat again. I have shared a couple of links in the chat. It's a completely voluntary survey. The reason why it asks for any identification information is not because we see it, but it's because we have external evaluations that take all of the identifying information out of the results and share it back with us, just so we can get a better idea of how this stuff is working. And then there is going to be one survey if you yourself are a parent, a caregiver, or a community member, and there's a separate survey if you are a service provider. So you can choose what survey you like. If you can answer any question, don't answer any question. If you have any questions, let me know. Um, and if at any time right now or afterwards, if you're like, I actually don't want those questions being recorded, you can just let us know, and we will be able to find the survey that you recorded and re-destroy it. And that is completely within your rights to do. So this is our agenda today. We're going to speak a bit about the background of why this information is important today, a little bit about anti-Black racism. That is what the ABR acronym is. We'll talk about some mental health definitions, categories of illnesses, a bit about intersectionality and the pandemics, and then what we can do next, some resources, and we will end with some questions. So please do keep yourself on mute. Place your questions in the chat. We will get to those questions at the end of the session. Take good care. Sometimes it's heavy topics. It's been a long day, especially if you're out, if you're in person, if you're out in the morning. So please, take your wellness seriously and take your breaks as needed, and just respect the confidentiality, especially if folks in the space are sharing information. So the reason why we're all here, so as we know, with some of our, our children, our students, our youth, we know that Black youth are facing significant barriers to mental health and addictions care due to anti-Black racism in the province. And this is why mental health literacy in the way that we're navigating is very important. It's timely, it's necessary. Black youth are, running into culturally inappropriate services, financial barriers, geographical barriers, lack of Black care providers, a whole experience of navigating stigma throughout the systems. And Black youth are disproportionately more likely to access mental health care via involuntary care pathways like hospitalization or interaction with the justice system, both of which Black youth are overrepresented in. And we have found that Black youth wait twice as long to access treatment compared to white youth. So this is the basis of why we began our project. Excuse me. And we want to, really identify what it is that we mean when we're saying anti-Black racism. And so we have a definition here from Professor Akua Benjamin. And the definition is that anti-Black racism is the policies and practices rooted in Canadian institutions such as education, healthcare, and justice that mirror and reinforce beliefs, attitudes, prejudice, stereotyping, and/or discrimination towards people of Black African descent. ABR is structural, it is systemic, it is interpersonal, it directly affects and impacts the mental health of Black youth. Our services are not created with our Black youth in mind, and Black youth are facing barriers at the service provider level, so like on an interpersonal level, and they're also facing barriers at institutional levels. And we know that Black youth experience overlapping discriminations based on their identities, whether they are a newcomer, whether they are food insecure, whether they come from backgrounds of poverty. Anti-Black racism really impacts the ways in which Black communities and our Black youth are facing other forms of discrimination. And so what I'm going to do here is throughout the session, I will share some quotes that directly come from the folks who participated in our focus groups. Many of them come from our own Black youth in our own communities. We did do research across the province, so some will come from different regions. And I'll read one of the quotes here. And this is from Jay, a Black youth in Toronto. And when this person was talking about defining anti-Black racism, he said that it was discrimination and stereotype specific to the Black community that is pervasive in every aspect of our day-to-day life. So just going outside, taking transit, going to work or the supermarket, you always feel like someone's eyes are on you. So it's kind of a hostile interaction a lot of the time. So when we talk about mental health literacy, what do we mean exactly? So when we define mental health literacy, while I'm going through the slide, I would love for you folks to share in the chat, if you'd like, to place in the chat some of the terms that you yourself use or that you hear your communities use when you are describing someone who is having mental difficulties. So you can go ahead and place that in the chat right now if you'd like, and I will go through this slide. So when I speak about mental health literacy, what I mean is mental health literacy is a component of overall health and well-being literacy. So how to define what mental health is, how to speak about it, how to get support for it, where to go for it, how to raise awareness for how our communities are engaging in mental health literacy, and how to get support to better take care of ourselves and our communities. Mental health literacy helps us to understand how to obtain and maintain good mental health, to identify mental illnesses and their treatments, and to decrease stigma and increase awareness and access. It's a lifelong skill that can be used for anyone because mental health literacy is for everyone. So I'm just going to pause to look in the chat to see if we have any responses. Not as yet. That's okay. If any terms come to mind about some of the ways in which you or your communities describe mental difficulties or any difficulties that you or your communities might experience, feel free to place that in the chat at any time. So these are the definitions that we are going to be working with moving forward. When we speak about mental health, what we mean is a person's condition with regards to their psychological and emotional well-being. What is their condition at any given point of time in terms of their mental state? So we all have mental health. There is no person that does not have mental health in the same way that there is no person that does not have physical health. So we can swap out the physical health part, the physical part of that term, and put in mental health, and it's pretty much synonymous. Mental health is something that affects all of us. None of us don't have mental health. Next, we're going to speak about mental health issue, mental illness, mental disorder, mental health condition, mental health problem. There are just so many terms. They're used interchangeably, and they can often get confusing as to what means what. So these six terms that we have, 5 terms that we have here is often used interchangeably and used to address the general state of needing additional support for your psychological, cognitive, or emotional circumstances. So if you get confused, you can just swap out the term physical health or physical for mental. So if someone had a physical illness, a physical disorder, a physical health issue, it would be the same counterpart for when someone has a mental health issue, a mental illness, or a mental disorder. Thanks, Patrina. It's the thought that the person is crazy nuts. Yeah. Definitely hearing the term crazy. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think I understand, Patrina, that it's not true. It's a stereotype, it's a generalization, but we definitely hear the term crazy or nuts a lot when describing someone going through a difficult time. Thanks, Patrina. And when we're thinking about mental health issue, mental illness, it's just the general state of needing additional support. And this can happen in a variety of ways. And we're going to go down here now to mental wellness, mental well-being, which refers to the states of feeling balanced, connected to others, and ready to meet life's challenges. And again, it goes hand in hand with physical health. It all impacts each other. So some of us have mental illness, some of us have mental wellness, some of us experience different states of all of these different states of being in one day, in 1 month, in 1 year. You might feel ready to take on all of life's challenges, and then on the other side, you might feel like you need some additional support, and that's exactly how mental health works. So mental health literacy in conversation. So how do we use this on a day-to-day basis? So when we speak about mental health, it's important to use person-first language. What I mean when I say that is that we attribute the person before we attribute their difficulty. So if I'm someone and I'm Amira and I experience manic depressive disorder, I'm not going to describe myself as a manic depressive, or I'm not going to describe someone else as being a manic depressive. There goes Amira she's manic depressive. That's not really how we want to describe someone who is navigating some difficulties. We want to say, I am Amira and I have manic depression, or I navigate having manic depression, or I experience symptoms of manic depression. Or there goes Amira who has manic depression, or this is a person who navigates the symptoms of manic depression. So we want to put the person first and their symptoms or their illness second or after. We don't want to place the illness before the person because we see a person before we see their illness. You know, there are many different types of mental health concerns that affect people in different ways, and we do know that mental health is a continuum. So I'm going to try to zoom in here so we can see this image a little bit better. And we see this continuum of mental health. It's sort of like a cyclical. So someone can be in any part of this continuum again throughout the day, throughout the month, throughout the year. We can find ourselves in any part of this little spectrum here. And so that means that we all have the chance to navigate mental health difficulties at any point in time in our lives. And we're always on a spectrum of mental health. It just depends, where are we landing? Are we landing where we're having a more serious mental illness? Are we landing where we're having optimal health and well-being, or anything in between? Okay. Thanks for the additional comments, Patrina. Appreciate that. So here's another quote. And while I'm reading this quote, I'm going to place a link in the chat for further reading that will support our next slide. So the quote I'd like to read is from Ramona, a Black youth who has experiences in the justice system in Toronto. And I feel like, she says, and I feel like a lot of help could be speaking to somebody. A lot of people don't want to speak to somebody, and speaking to somebody is not just necessarily your peers or your parents, because a lot of us Black people can't do that. We cannot do that. Our parents don't want to hear that we're sad or upset, or they hurt our feelings, or we feel frustrated, or we're not financially happy, or whatever. They don't want to hear that. So we need other outlets to talk, and that's therapy. But then that's a stigma. When we're talking to therapists and sharing what's wrong, your friends will shun you, your community will shun you. So that's just one quote from a Black youth who has experience in the justice system. And I share this to demonstrate why mental health literacy is important, necessary for Black communities specifically. So now I'm going to share some common mental illnesses, different categories of common mental illness. I won't spend too much time on these slides. It's a short session, and this is just such important information that I don't want to rush through it. So if you have any questions about the next few slides, please place them in the chat, but I have placed a really wonderful resource in the chat that lets you click through and read up on the different symptoms of these different categories a little bit more in depth. So the first category of mental illness that I will speak to is mood disorders. So that's things like depression, bipolar disorder, postpartum depression, etc. And the one thing to note about this is that it's more than being unhappy. When I go through all of the categories of mental illness, the mental illness is more than the sum of its symptoms. And it really means that, are the sum of my symptoms extreme? Are they interrupting my day-to-day life and my relationships? And are they destabilizing? That is how we determine if someone is experiencing a mental illness. So whether it's you, your peers, your community members, your children, your students, this is what we need to note when we're trying to determine if someone might benefit from additional support. So our next category is anxiety disorders. This is things like panic disorder, social anxiety, agoraphobia. Again, this is not daily anxiousness or nerves. It's symptoms that interrupt your day-to-day life. Things like cognitive symptoms like intrusive thoughts, fear of the worst, as well as coupled with physical symptoms like heart palpitations and digestive issues. We now move into personality disorders. There are different categories here. There are paranoid personality disorders, impulsive personality disorders, and anxious personality disorders. The one thing that I will note is the paranoid personality disorders is not schizophrenia. Paranoid personality disorders is a disorder where someone is aware of their symptoms and wants to get better. Schizophrenia is someone that retreats from life, wants to, be a little bit more in isolation and is not always aware of their symptoms. That is the difference. So personality disorders are things like borderline personality disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder like OCD, etc. So here we do have schizophrenia. Schizophrenia is defined by someone who has symptoms of psychosis as well as cognitive symptoms. So they have symptoms of psychosis, which distorts the way one's brain normally behaves, as well as cognitive symptoms like difficulties with attention or memory. We also have eating disorders, anorexia nervosa, bulimia, and binge eating. These are categorized by an obsession with food, appearance, and body weight, as well as accompanied by psychological disturbances that interrupts your day-to-day living and relationships with other people. Most people feel powerless over their eating habits when someone has an eating disorder. And lastly, for this session is trauma-related disorders. So trauma in general, an example is post-traumatic stress disorder or PTSD. So trauma, we mean that it's a challenging emotional consequence that comes from living through a distressing event, and it's a natural response to extreme distress over a period of time. And these thoughts and recurring memories of the event seriously impacts someone's lives long after any danger is still present. So now we know a little bit more about the different categories of mental illness. What does this mean for how we engage with mental health literacy in real life? So when it comes specifically to Black communities and the ways in which we engage with our children, our young folks, and our students, we do know that there's a long way to go towards ensuring that those who need the most support are receiving adequate services. We know that. We also know that there are different generational understandings of mental health and different generational understandings of the appropriate ways to go about getting support. We know that the ways in which we talk about mental health is different than the ways our young folks are talking about it, and different than the ways that our parents had talked about it, or the ways that we didn't talk about it, in older generations. So the one thing to remember here is that what works for you or your children or your peers may not work vice versa. We have to think about experiences in a very individualized, specified way, because Black people, we come from so many different places and we have so many different identities and so many different backgrounds that there's no way that we can say that there's going to be one specific resource or programming or support that's going to work for all Black folks everywhere, especially in Canada, when mental health care has changed so rapidly, so recently. Over the last 20 years, things have really, really changed. So some of the things to think about is when we're thinking about how to get care for ourselves and our loved ones, is intersectionality and the social determinants of health. Intersectionality, if you have been attending sessions today, I think you might have heard some other folks talk about this, perhaps. Intersectionality is when two or more of your identities provide you with a unique outlook on life. Again, Black youth come from all different types of communities. So this is another layer that we need to think about when we're engaging in mental health literacy and mental health and addictions care. We know that we have one Black youth who might come from the Caribbean, one Black youth who might come from the continent, one Black youth who is a queer youth or a trans youth, who is LGBTQ+, a youth that might have been recently imprisoned or has experiences with the justice system. Black youth have all different types of identities, and we know that sometimes having more than one of those identities makes it a little bit more difficult to navigate things like mental health care. So that is what we mean when we say intersectionality. And the social determinants of health is when we have the understanding that unique identities also bring out additional challenges in other areas of life, such as school or work or housing or immigration, things like substance use, food insecurity, economic insecurity, that others might not experience in the same way. So we have, oh, great question, Patrina. Let's get to that in the Q&A. Thank you so much. Because this is exactly what I'm speaking to, the intergenerational trauma aspect. Thank you so much. So the social determinants of health, we know that the person A, is a Black young woman youth, and person B is also a Black young woman youth, but she is Muslim and she is queer. So that Black young woman youth might have different intersections because she's Muslim and queer, and might have an extra difficult time navigating services. And that Black young Muslim woman youth who is also queer might then end up having more difficulties at school, more difficulties in work, more difficulties securing housing and food and good jobs and that sort of thing. So that is what we mean when we speak to the social determinants of health. And that is why we have mental health literacy, to increase awareness, share information, and really just have open discussions. We definitely have different experiences of accessing and supporting our mental health, and it's the different experiences make us stronger. So the last thing that we like to think about when we are thinking about mental health literacy and getting access to care is the pandemics that we recently have been living through. So I'm going to place a resource in the chat if folks want to read more about the impact of COVID-19 on Black communities. But what I do want to say is that we have the COVID-19 pandemic that has added another layer onto the barriers that we are already facing, and just really amplifying the barriers that Black youth were already facing in terms of lack of access to basic needs, how social distancing guidelines really impacted Black youth differently, increasing isolation and decreasing in-person services, and really highlighting that barrier that Black youth might have for those who might not have access to technology and might not be able to access a lot of the virtual supports that were coming up, across the cities and provinces in the last couple of years. And we also lived through a recently globally highlighted anti-Black racism pandemic that really impacted us personally, deeply, and differently. So it was just, again, the amplification of longstanding racist practices and experiences, and of course, the increase in violence and police-involved brutality that we also had to navigate on top of COVID-19. This, too, impacts the ways in which we navigate mental health care. So I will read one last quote here. It's from Sean. Sean is a youth from Toronto, a Black youth from Toronto who identifies as being 2S LGBTQ+. When discussing Black Lives Matter, they don't mean all Black lives, they mean cisgendered Black people's lives. Even when they discuss BLM, it's more so focused on the males, the violence against males, and we don't even discuss as much the violence towards Black women. When it comes to the BLM movement, when it comes to the taking up spaces and discussing anti-Blackness, queer people, for the most part, are at the head of these things, but they are never included in the conversations amongst the everyday people. When people say all Black lives matter, they don't mean Black queer people. They especially don't mean Black trans people, right? So that's a big difficulty that people deal with. And so this quote is really just speaking to the identities of being an intersectional Black youth, living through the COVID-19 pandemic, living through the anti-Black racism pandemic of the summer of 2020, and how that really, really takes a big impact and a toll on one's mental health and mental wellness. So what do we do with all this information? What do we do next? Where do we take it? If you're supporting a loved one, I always like to say the best support you can give a loved one, especially if it's someone that you're giving care for, like a child or a student or a young person, the best support is to get support for yourself. I think leading by example, engaging in your own mental health care can do wonders for the ways in which you support the young people in your lives. I have on the side here some good questions to ask someone that you might be interested in supporting, but I think these are really good questions to ask yourself as well. The hope is that you'll be able to get and offer support in a variety of ways, both local to your region and now virtually, if you're able to. Again, in this healthcare sector, it's really pushed on us that the best support is prevention and a confirmed diagnosis by a clinical professional, which I truly believe. I do believe that prevention can go wonders in terms of supporting one's own mental health or supporting the mental health of a loved one, but that's not always possible. And confirmed diagnosis by a clinical professional is not always possible either. As we've seen through this presentation, there are so many barriers to accessing this support. But the good thing is we know that there are a lot of community-based practices, a lot of really great things, especially over the last couple of years, a lot of really great practices that have been coming out um, of the ways in which we are supporting each other already. And we will go through those briefly, some resources and supports that are available. And if anyone in this space is listening as a service provider, as a service provider, a researcher, a policy advocate, policymakers, if you're listening, it is important for these services to be free, to be accessible, to be long-term, to be trauma-informed, and to be culturally responsive. So I will send these slides out to the organizers and hopefully they will get into your hands. I'm not going to go through all of these resources here, but I will say that if a resource on this list is bolded, that means it is a Black specific resource. The ones that I want to highlight, if you are looking for a confirmed diagnosis or someone to speak to, there are some really great lists here, including Psychology Today, that can, you can search for a therapist or a psychologist or a counselor or social worker by different categories, as well as free or low cost therapy. Sliding scale just means that they give a range in which you might pay, let's say $50 to $100, and you can choose based on what you can afford, what you would like to pay. Here, I would like to highlight community health centers. Community health centers are really great supports. Where do I have community health centers? Oh, actually not this slide. This slide, what I want to highlight is peer support. Peer support is really great because it's usually people that look like you, whether it's like for your young folks or for it's yourself. It's usually people who look like you, have similar values as you, and who have been through similar things as you, providing support and just creating open spaces to talk. Um, oh yes, it was this slide that I wanted to highlight community health centers. These are really great. You don't need OHIP to go to these. They're usually in your neighborhoods and they are free, and you have the ability to get community services like social support groups, food banks, etc. You're also able to get mental health services like therapy, counseling, social work. You're also able to get physical health services like nutritionists, family doctors, and dietitians, etc. So the only other things I would like to highlight is that we have some supports here for folks who are deaf or hard of hearing, including texting or calling 911. You have to register for this service before you need the service, but that is an option if you want to have emergency supports that support being deaf or hard of hearing. We also have services that are not clinical at all, like the wellness and mindfulness services, programs and groups. They're not focused specifically on mental health, but they are supposed to focus, on wellness, mindfulness, and Black communities. So I would suggest those. And lastly, what I want to highlight is that there is the option for virtual emergency visits and mobile crisis teams. Mobile crisis teams don't involve the police if you ever need emergency support, and virtual emergency visits are accessing emergency rooms via your phone or computer, so you don't have to go in person if you do need emergency support. So that's really it. The last thing I'll say, I won't share this now, but we do have some links here to the tools that we have created at the Black Health Alliance. These are Black specific tools on where to find Black specific organizations. So here we have a database called Connect Me, and this is just a screenshot. If you want to stick around after, I can show you how to use it, but I'm not going to keep us past our time. But it does let you choose from different locations, different costs, different languages, different categories, what organization it is that are available to you, and it'll pull up all the organizations that meet all of your needs, and it will tell you right off the bat which ones are Black focused and which ones are mainstream. We also have our interactive map here. This interactive map shows you, based on where you are right now, you can zoom into your location and it'll tell you what organizations are around you, maybe within walking distance or bus distance, what locations are around you, what organizations are around you, what is their contact information, what services do they offer, and again, are they Black focused or are they mainstream? You can find these on our website. Whoops. And with all of these slides, if hopefully you can, the organizers will send these out. These links are all clickable. So you can just click on these links and it'll bring up the website with all of the information to access all of these resources.